For this month. I do not know much about him, so I will let him tell you more about himself. Thank you.
Hi family, I'm Cameron, I'm an alcoholic. A couple of disclaimers first. One, I hope no one was here last month because I'm just going to regurgitate the same exact stuff that the guy before me said. He probably said it better though. So, second, if I say anything that conflicts with what your sponsor says, your sponsor is 100% right. I believe God blesses sponsorship, and so I'm going to share the only thing that I'm allowed to share from the podium, which was my experience with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Like I said, if that conflicts with something that your sponsor says, your sponsor is 100% right. I'm going to pretty much get right into it. Out of respect to the traditions of Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm going to attempt to stick to alcohol. My story does include other things, so there might be points or when I came into the rooms of AA, it was very, very important for me to understand the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous and understand the way to walk through the 12-step process, and I couldn't necessarily identify or relate with everything that the book that was written in 1939 or published in 1939 was saying, for the reason that I didn't speak 1939 English, and I needed a sponsor to sit me down and show me exactly what it meant and exactly how it applied to my life. And obviously tonight, we're going to talk about steps 1, 2, and 3, and I'm a big believer that there's no work done in the first 3 steps. I believe that the work for the first three steps is typically done while you're out using or drinking. I think we come in and we gain the information, we're able to layer that over our story and look back and see all the times that, the first step manifested itself in my life. I think I come in here so incredibly broken that I'm not left with much option other than to believe in maybe something will work. And then when I get to that 3rd step, I think it's very, very simple when I've hit that place of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization to make the decision to go on with the rest of the step process. Again, I come in here and I gain that information. And tonight what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to portray that information in the way that it was portrayed to me, but it's very important that if you're a newcomer sitting in here and you haven't been through that, one, you get connected with a sponsor. Get connected with someone that has walked this 12-step path and can show you exactly how they walked it so that they could have the spiritual experience that freed them from the obsession to drink. That's the first thing. The second thing is that you go back and you look at the information that we discussed here tonight and you layer that over your story. And you see, where is this relevant to me? I'm a huge believer that a lack of motivation to do steps 2 through 12 comes from a lack of internalization or understanding of step 1. And that was my experience. And I was a kid that came in and out of the rooms for a while, not gaining that information. And I don't think it was due to lack of teachers. I think that my ears were just closed at that point, but I didn't understand the first step. And if I don't truly believe that I will 100% walk out of this room and short of a spiritual experience, drink or use again, why would I be motivated to do steps 2 through 12? I don't even meet the first requirement of the program, which is that I be entirely convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. If I don't believe that 100% and my experience doesn't show that, why would I be motivated to go through the step process? I would still, in some way, shape, or form, be under the impression that my way works. My sobriety date is July 6, 2013. And pretty much on that day, I was at that place of pitiful and incomprehensible demoralization, which I believe, for the most part, is a requirement of coming into the rooms. I think a lot of people come in, the only requirement to be here and you're welcome here is a desire to stop drinking. That's it. But for me, I needed something. I looked around at my life and I had come to that place that it talks about in A Vision for You where it says, I couldn't imagine a life with alcohol and I couldn't imagine a life without alcohol. I thought I wanted to die. I don't think that I actually did. I just wanted the way that I was living to stop, and I didn't know any way out of it. Had I looked around, and this is just my experience, if I had looked around at my life at that point on July 6, 2013, and it would have looked similar to how it looks right now, and maybe how I felt internally right now, I can't say that I would have been motivated to go through that process. Bill Wilson says it's by our circumstances, not our virtues, that we sought change. And we're going to talk about unmanageability here in a minute, but I looked around at the circumstances of my life, and it was burned to the ground. There was nothing left. There was nothing for me to go back to. There was nothing, for me to grasp onto. I came into the rooms with nothing. It wasn't until later that I learned why that is. And we'll talk about it here in a minute. But I have the privilege or the opportunity of sponsoring a lot of guys over the last 2.5 years. And anyone that knows me or has been around me for a while knows that I constantly ask people the question, what's your understanding of the first step? And again, all I can share is my experience, and I think that this, for me, is the part that, as I've gone through the rooms, and I've been to thousands of meetings over the last 2 years, and I've been in and out of the rooms prior to July 6, 2013, which is my sobriety date, I feel like this is the thing that we lack. And I feel like a lot of newcomers or people in South Florida or people in Alcoholics Anonymous in general walk around with absolutely no idea what the first step of recovery is. And they can look up at the wall and they can see, like, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. And like, okay, that sort of makes sense. Like, I can see that in my life. Like, I'm powerless over alcohol and my life is clearly unmanageable as I look around at the circumstances. But the fact is the majority of people, like, unfortunately in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, don't know what that actually means. You know, the whole reason that, I mean, we have a book, obviously, which essentially is really all we have. I mean, it says in the book that we have meetings so that the newcomer can find the fellowship that they seek, and they can get into the hands of somebody who hopefully has a relationship with God and hopefully was walked through this 12-step book, which is written as a 12-step call. It's written in a way that if every single member of Alcoholics Anonymous was to disappear tonight, a drunk could be walking down at the beach there in Lake Worth, and this book could float up, and they could read it, and they could figure out exactly how to get sober. It is clear-cut directions written on how to get sober, which is why when I sit down with sponsees, we work directly out of the literature. So if it's written as a 12-step call, the book's going to tell me every single step that I'm at except for step 1. And like when I read step 1, or except for step 2, for the reason that it's a coming to believe. It's an experience that we need to have, and we'll talk about that here after we talk about step 1. But as I went through the book and I started to learn what it meant to suffer from alcoholism, as I started to see, you know, the first, Bill Wilson's a very, very smart guy. You know, the first almost half of the clear-cut directions is, of the first 102 pages, is about the problem. Because Bill Wilson understands, how could I possibly fix a problem if I don't know what the problem is? How could I possibly defeat an enemy if I don't know what it looks like, where it dwells, or what its habits are? He spends at least 40-some-odd pages of the book going over that and driving that same point home over and over and over again. The big book doesn't say a lot of different things. It says a couple things a lot of different ways. And as I went through that and I finally got to page 30 and my sponsor sat me down and we read it, and page 30, second paragraph, what it said is, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we were alcoholics. This was the first step in recovery, which is far different than what it says up on the wall, where it says we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. So it's the same concept. I need to fully concede to my innermost self. First of all, if I'm looking at the wall and like, they're a summary of the steps. In the same way, if I handed out a newspaper to every one of you right now and you saw the big headline on the top, you could see it and you'd have a general idea what the article was about. But if you really wanted to know what it was about, you would have to read the article. The big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is the article. If you want to understand how the steps work and how that process is outlined for you, you need to read this. Because I can look up that and I can kind of understand step 1, and then like I get all the steps up until step 2, and then I'm completely lost. And if I'm working steps off the wall, typically what was taught to me is I will get off the wall results. I need to use the literature of Alcoholics Anonymous. And what it says is, as I said, we learned we had to fully concede to our innermost selves that we are alcoholics. So I need to surrender to my heart and to my head that I'm a real alcoholic. How could I possibly do that if I don't know what an alcoholic is? I told you I was a kid that came in and out of the rooms, and I could walk into an AA meeting, or I could walk into IOP or wherever I was, and I could raise my hand and I could say, hey, I'm Cameron, I'm an alcoholic, I'm a drug addict, and I could share some stuff that maybe it sounded cute, it sounded good, but the fact was there was no meaning to it. It wasn't accurate. It was stuff that I had heard other people say, and I thought it sounded good, so I figured I would share it with you for the sole purpose of boosting my ego and trying to make myself sound good. The fact is I had no idea what it meant to be an alcoholic. I came into South Florida under the impression that if only I could fix my circumstances, if I could make the things around me better, I would get better. For the reason that when I come down here, my circumstances are destroyed. That logically makes sense. If I could get the good job, the good friends, if I could get the right girlfriend, if I could get the right money or the right car, that kind of stuff, like I'll be happy and then I'll be okay because I won't need this stuff. I thought I had a problem with drugs and alcohol. What I realized is that my problem comes when I no longer have drugs and alcohol. And so how could I possibly concede to this idea that I'm a real deal alcoholic if I don't understand what that means? And my sponsor flipped back to something that we had already read, which was the doctor's opinion, and he laid out the 3 folds of the disease of alcoholism for me, something that I believe is absolutely crucial for any real deal alcoholic or drug addict to understand. And the first part that he talked about, and we'll talk about him all tonight, is the physical aspect. It says something along the lines of, and so suggested many years ago, this physical aspect was the manifestation of an allergy. So he sat me down. He said, you know what an allergy is? Are you allergic to anything? And he told me an allergy is an abnormal reaction to something. It doesn't say if it's positive. It doesn't say if it's negative. You don't get into any of that. It's just an abnormal reaction. So he asked if I was allergic to anything. I said, yeah, I'm allergic to peaches. He said, when's the last time you ate peaches? And like I told him, he said, what happens? He's like, I broke out in, I break out in hives. He said, would it be possible for you to break out in hives if you didn't eat peaches? And I was like, no, probably not. He's like, so once you saw that and you realized the consequences and they've manifested themselves over you, did you eat peaches again after that? And I was like, well, no. Maybe by accident, like once or twice, but like, no, I've never deliberately went out and eaten peaches. And he was like, okay, keep that in mind. He explained to me, he said, do you think, I'll just ask you guys, does anyone in here break out in hives when they eat peaches? Probably not. That makes mine the abnormal reaction. So I have an abnormal reaction to alcohol. What is that reaction? When I put a drop of alcohol in my system, this phenomenon of craving develops. And that next drink or that next drug becomes more important than anything else. Phenomenon of craving, an overpowering desire for more. It is an overpowering desire for more. What the book says is it doesn't make sense to me as an alcoholic that once I put a drink in my system, I can't control how much that I drink because my moral compass is screwed up, because I'm maladjusted to life, because all these different things, which makes sense. What makes sense to a guy like me is I put a drink in my system and I react different than normal people. There's an actual physical reaction that happens that causes me to be more concerned about that next drink or drug than anything else. And, there's tons and tons of examples that illustrate that. And the Japanese have a proverb that says, man takes a drink takes a drink, and then drink takes a man. And I found that to be very, very true in my life. When I shoot that first bag of dope, I'm no longer deciding how much heroin I'm going to do. And I know this is Alcoholics Anonymous, but just a quick survey. Did anyone in here do heroin? Anyone ever said to yourself, I've got 10 bags, I'm going to save 3 of these for tomorrow morning so I'm not sick, and then did them all at night? Yeah, you guys that are laughing, you probably have a serious problem in your life. With that being said, what the book asks me is, when I drink, can I control how much that I drink every single time that I drink? For me, the answer is no. There might be an occasion where maybe I can control how much I drink, but I can promise you 2 things. Let's say the girlfriend's like, hey, if you don't get too drunk tonight, like, I'll sleep with you. And I'm like, all right, sick, let's do it. I'm like, I go out, I might be able to have 2 beers. I might, but I can promise you 2 things. One is that I cannot control and enjoy my drinking. The second is that when I'm given that same offer a couple days later, it's probably not going to happen. I cannot control how much that I drink every single time. So I put that first one in my system, and I'm off to the races. So, like I said before, you're not going to find me in a hotel on Dixie tonight mixing up peach smoothies or like crushing up peaches, hoping that I can like eat them if they're... It's not going to happen. So what that tells me is that this physical aspect is not the main part of the disease. What the book suggests for that is entire abstinence. And like, people say like, oh, I can't stop. Like, I'm a kid that stopped forever, like 2,000 times. If you don't think that you can stop, if you're on a run, which God willing, and hopefully none of you will ever be on a run again, punch a cop in the face. I guarantee that you stop for at least 48 hours. My issue is not that I can't stop. My issue is that I cannot stay stopped. And that's where the mental part of this comes in. And what the book says is that my thinking is the crux of my problem. So, if you're sitting in here and you're detoxed or you're not coming off of a run today and the drugs and alcohol are out of your system, the physical aspect is not an issue. Which means if you're sitting in here, you are not having a craving. As my sponsor said before, would it be possible for you to break out in hives if you didn't eat peaches? Well, no. So how could I possibly have a craving if I don't have a drug or alcohol in my system? So when you're sitting in IOP or when you're sitting in treatment and you're off detox medications and the friendly nurse comes up who's well-intentioned and good meaning and says, you having any cravings today? You're not. For the reason that you don't have anything in your system. What you're having is the mental obsession. And a lot of this stuff is just verbiage things, but the reason I stress on it and try to hit home on it is it's something that's going to allow you in the future to look at somebody or talk to somebody and understand, like, they might not get this. This might be somebody that I need to help. And unfortunately, from what I've seen in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous, is once I was taken through the doctor's opinion in this way, or once I take a sponsee through the doctor's opinion like this, They know more than 90% of the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's very, very sad. And I don't want to get too far off course, but this was information that I could not have gotten sober if I did not understand it. And I did not internalize it. And I had some people try to show me that prior to when I actually got it. So as I said, it's not a reflection of AA. It's not a reflection of the teachers. My ears were just closed. So like I said, the mental obsession. The issue is not that I can't stop. The issue is that I can't stay stopped. So what's an obsession? It's a thought that's so powerful that it crowds out all other thoughts. So that no thought can coexist while that thought is present. You know, we talk about it in the sense of like, it's the insanity. You know, it says in there as a solution that I have this inability to stop touching this hot stove. So like, this is the lie that I tell myself to convince myself that this time it's going to be different. That whatever the lie is, what I can promise all of you is if you're a real alcoholic or a real drug addict, and it's the same thing, and I'm not here to tell you if you are or you're not, if you can concede to yourself that you are, you'll never go out on the truth. You will always, always, always go out on a lie. And when someone says, like, what's the mental part of this? Like, the easiest way to talk about it is it's a lie. It's the lie I tell myself. It's the, this time it's going to be different, and here's how. Or it's the, anyone in here ever gone out on, excuse my language, the fuck it's? I'm sure. When you got back from your run, did you care? Probably. So, whatever it is, it's going to be a lie. And here's essentially how that works. Like it says, I can't stop touching that hot stove. So like, maybe there was a time when I was a child and I saw fire for the first time and I noticed like it's a bunch of different colors. It's not the same color. It's like pretty. And I'm like, I wonder how it feels. And I touch it and it burns me and I'm like, oh shit, like I'm never doing that again. Now, imagine if I was Dory from Finding Nemo and I touch it and it burns me and I'm like, oh, I'm never doing that again. And then I'm like, ooh, that's pretty. And I touch it again, over and over and over again. That's what happens to me as an alcoholic. This time it's going to be different. This time it's going to be different. So let me give you an example. As a 20-some-odd kid, Penn State University, laying in bed, using and drinking has ceased being fun. You know, I was at that place already where I couldn't imagine a life with alcohol, couldn't imagine it without. It had stopped being fun. And I wake up in the morning, and what I do is I go over this mental list of reasons why I'm not going to drink that day. And I'm thinking, I'm like, well, if I drink today, like I'll get kicked out of school, I'll get kicked off the team, the girl's going to leave, I'll lose the job, I won't have a place to sleep, all of these different things. If I piss in a cup, I'm going away for at least a year, I'm on parole, etc., etc., etc. So what I do is I make a decision based on those facts that I'm not going to drink that day. And it's a decision based on truth. It's the easiest kind of decision to make. And then what happens for an alcoholic like me is I get out of bed and about 10 seconds later another thought comes. And that thought is, well, you could have just one. You could have just one. And the scary thing about being an alcoholic is none of those true things that I just thought about ever come back into my mind. And as the book says, if they do come back into my mind, they are easily supplanted with the idea that this time it's going to be different. I'm only going to have one. None of that stuff right there will happen if I just have one. Now my experience shows, and I look back over the however long I was running for, and like, I never have just one of anything that I like. You know, it's very, very simple. So if that's my experience, then the idea that I'm only going to have one is what? It's a lie. It's a lie. If you're sitting in here and you're a real alcoholic, you will never, ever go out on the truth. And that's the mental obsession. And we talk about it in 3 different ways. It's mentioned in the doctor's opinion, an inability to differentiate the true from the false. That lie pops into my head, and I can't tell if it's true or it's false. Coupled with a lack of perception and a lack of proportion. So we walk outside, beautiful EDI, there's a guy across the street, he's walking down the street, he's talking to himself. We can all look at that and be like, he's probably not all there upstairs. You know, but in his own perception, do you think that he thinks that? Probably not. Probably not. So when that lie pops into my head, what happens is I'm that guy. I'm that guy. In my perception, as the book talks about with the guy that mixes the whiskey with his milk, I truly believe that this time it'll be different. Because now I'm drinking it with milk and I might have a full stomach, so like I'll be fine. I truly believe it. All of you guys can look at that and be like, you're an idiot, that's outrageous, you're an alcoholic, but in my own perception, I believe that's real. Perception, my ability to assess the situation based on what I see, hear, touch, see, etc., etc. Lack of proportion, size. So the idea of, well, the fun's going to be this much and the consequences will be this much. And I believe that. I believe that. Maybe the relief will be this much and the consequences will be this much. And then what happens is I use or I drink and I go out on a run and I come back and the consequences were this much and the fun was this much. I will never, ever go out on the truth. It's just not going to happen. So that's the physical and the mental. Then it brings us to the other part, which I don't know if it's the most important, but I mean, I tell people all the time, I don't think I was born with an allergy or an obsession. I don't really know. I don't really think it's relevant. What I do think I was born with was the third part of this, which is referred to as the spiritual malady. You know, we talk about it as a disconnection from God, self, and others. It's the reason that I can sit in a room much like this with 25, 30 people, however many, and still not feel a part of, and still not feel like I belong. Maybe I walk into a room and there's 2 or 3 people laughing, like they're definitely talking about me, 100%. Like I'm just not comfortable in my own skin. I'm full of fear. I wake up in the morning and like I'm just not okay. I put down drugs and alcohol and I'm left with Cameron and like my skin crawls. I get worse. You know, that's how I know that I'm a real alcoholic. When I put down drugs and alcohol, my life gets worse. I'll stay out longer because I'm afraid of the withdrawal or I'm afraid to kick or, you know, it's terrible to, you know, lay on your couch with the cold sweats, chugging orange juice. Like, I get it. But what I find out is I think that that's the hard part. Then what happens is I find myself sober. And I'm just not okay sober. That's my problem, is when I'm left with me, I'm not okay. And what I found that to be is that disconnection from God, self, and others. So those are the 3 folds of the disease. My sponsor walked me through that. He showed me exactly what it was to be an alcoholic. He asked me questions. When did you see the allergy present in your life? When did you see the obsession present in your life? You know, tell me about the spiritual malady. And the spiritual malady will happen sober, like if obviously. But if I'm not connected, like, 2.5 years sober, sometimes it'll crop up and I'll see stuff. Like just 20 minutes ago, I was sitting there with my friend and it was like about 10 minutes before the meeting and I stood up and I was like, I'm going to go vape. And then I was like, I actually don't know any of those kids outside, so I sat right back down. But it's like that feeling of just not being good enough. That feeling of like, okay, I'm standing out here, I don't know who to talk to, I don't know what to do, what am I supposed to be doing in this situation? Like, I'm just not okay. And my mind goes rampant. Then he walked me through the actual disease cycle and what that looks like in my life. Once I had internalized that I had an obsession of the mind, that I had an allergy of the body, and that I definitely had a spiritual malady, he showed me what that cycle looks like and what cycle I'll be trapped in for the rest of my life, short of a spiritual experience, until I die or go insane or get locked up or hopefully hit some sort of emotional, spiritual bottom and come into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and find a sponsor that can walk me through the steps and connect me to that power, those are my options, you know what I mean? So he showed me that cycle, and what the book says is they're irritable, restless, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once from taking a few drinks. So irritable, restless, and discontented. When I put down drugs and alcohol, this is me sober, I get irritable, I'm restless, and I'm discontented. And this is another thing that my sponsor had to sit me down and explain to me, like, what those actually mean. Like, okay, I'm restless. I just get out of treatment. I'm in there 30 days. I'm as sober as I'm going to be, physically speaking. And I walk into this halfway house, and I'm sitting there, and, like, I just don't know what to do with myself. Like, I have nowhere to go. I have no business. I don't have a job. I don't have a girlfriend. I am on property restrictions, so I can't go anywhere, but I just need to go. And I'll wake up, I'll go watch ESPN, I'll have a cup of coffee, I'll go smoke a cigarette, I'll see what they're doing at the office, I'll go back, turn on ESPN for 10 seconds, and then I'll leave there to go do something else. I just gotta go, I gotta go. I'm restless. Then I'm irritable. Okay, so I make some friends at the halfway, cool. Maybe some friends from treatment, it's like we get to know each other, and one morning they come in, and I'm suffering from untreated alcoholism. There's no prayer, there's no meditation, there's nothing to combat those things in my life. And one of my friends comes in, and it's nothing to do with him. It's nothing to do with what he's saying. He's just driving me nuts. And I'm sitting there, and I'm imagining just bashing his head off the wall because I'm so incredibly irritable. And then I'm discontented. So I'm newly sober. I get a nice little job. I work 40-hour a week, and I get a paycheck for $250. And I'm excited. I'm like, cool. Now I can, buy cigarettes, get some food, take my girlfriend from treatment out to dinner or something. And then, that's a joke. And then what happens is I go back to work the next week. I work 40 hours. At the end of the week, I get the same paycheck, and I open that up. I look at it, and I'm like, they're screwing me. I'm working way too hard to get paid this little. And all of a sudden, I'm no longer content with the thing that just made me happy a week prior. And I'm discontented. Irritable, restless, and discontented unless they can again experience the sense of ease and comfort which comes at once from taking a few drinks. Drinks which I see others taking with impunity. And then what it says is, As I succumb to the desire again, as I always do, the phenomenon of craving develops. I pass into the well-known stages of a spree, emerging remorseful with a firm resolution not to drink again. This is repeated over and over. And my sponsor stopped me. He explained to me what this meant, and he said exactly. He said, listen, man, let's say I'm in a relationship, and like she's absolutely done with me drinking. She's sick of it. And I tell her, like, listen, I'm going to stop. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Like, give me one more chance. I promise I won't do this again. And she's like, okay. Like, I'll give you one more chance. And like, I mean it. When I sit there saying that to her, I could pass a lie detector test. I meant it as much as I mean it sitting here with you guys tonight saying, like, I never want to use again. I never want to go back to active alcoholism. And then what happens is we're going along. I no longer have alcohol in my life, so I become irritable, restless, discontented. We're fighting over stupid stuff that doesn't matter. I left a dish in the sink, or she's texting somebody. She's definitely texting another guy. We're just arguing. And then what happens is Friday rolls around, my paycheck gets deposited, and I think to myself, like, my boys are going out to the bar tonight. You know, I struggle with outside substances, so I could go out, and I'm not going to be tempted to drink. I'll just shoot pool with the boys. I'll have a good night. And I get out there, and what happens is the obsession hits. And this thought comes, and this thought is, you could have just one. You could have one beer. She's not going to know. You don't have a problem with alcohol. It'll give you a little relief from this chaos going on in your head. You'll be fine. And then my experience is, as I succumb to the desire again, as I always do, the phenomenon of craving develops. So I have that one beer. I might have one or two more, and then I'm going to the ATM, and I'm going to the hood to meet Julio to get right. I come home 3 days later, and she's pissed, if she's even there. And when let's say she is there. And I'm an alcoholic. I can be pretty convincing or manipulative when I need to be. So I'm like, baby, just give me one more chance. I know how I screwed up. I don't want to do this again. I'm done. I promise. I mean it. Give me one more shot. She gives me one more shot. And again, I put down the alcohol, and I become irritable, restless, discontented. And I start going through my week. And then what happens is my paycheck gets deposited on Friday, and this thought comes like, last week you got in trouble because you went out to the bar. Maybe if you got a six-pack and brought it home and had one or two, well, you know, she's at work. She's not going to know. You'll get relief. You got mouthwash, so your breath won't smell like. You'll be good. And I have the one or two. She gets home from work. I'm like, hey, babe, I'm going to get cigarettes. And I come home 6 days later, covered in dirt, haven't showered, and she's gone. Can anyone relate to that? That's when my sponsor sat me down, and he said, this is repeated over and over. You are stuck in that cycle. And he's, again, part of my language, but this is how it was brought to me. He said, you're fucked. Anytime I ask you what your understanding of the first step is, that's what I want you to tell me. Because you will 100% walk out of this room, and short of a spiritual experience, or if you've already had one, short of continuing to do the spiritual disciplines that have connected you to the power, which has freed you from the obsession, you'll drink again. And that's true of me as well. If I stop doing the things that have connected me to some sort of power that could free me from the obsession will return. Fortunately, the book doesn't just leave you at like, hey, you're screwed, good luck, pal. What it says is, this is repeated over and over, unless this person can experience an entire psychic change. So how do I do that? That's the million-dollar question. How do I have that entire psychic change that will free me from alcoholism, physically or mentally and spiritually? The physical allergy will always be there. If I go out and eat peaches right now, I'll still break out in hives. Same thing, if I were to go out and drink, I would still develop that phenomenon of craving. But how do I have a spiritual malady? Well, the 12th step on the wall says, having had a spiritual awakening. It's a promise. It doesn't say, if perhaps you've had a spiritual awakening by this point, then you can go carry this message to others. No, it says, having had one. It's promised. It's promised by the 10th step that the obsession will be removed. I have ceased fighting anything or anyone, for by this time sanity is returned. And that was the first step. I'm screwed. I'm screwed. I needed to fully understand that when it talks about powerless, what it's talking about is I lack the power of choice and drink. If I had the power to make a decision to just never drink again, I can promise all of you guys I wouldn't be sitting here. Because I wouldn't need Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't need to sponsor people. I wouldn't need to answer my phone at 3 a.m. for a terrified newcomer, because I'd just be not picking up no matter what. I would have made a decision to stop and done so. And that's another thing that's thrown around in the rooms constantly that there's just no accuracy to. And I think it comes from what it talks about in the book, A Problem Drinker, that's somebody that's welcome here by all means, and we love them and we care about them, but they come in and they say things like, no matter what, just don't pick up, because that works for them. They come in and they come down to sunny South Florida and they hashtag live where you vacation and they gym, tan, laundry, and they start to feel a little bit better. I come down here and I try to do those things because that's what I saw somebody else do, and it doesn't work for me because I don't get better internally. So when we talk about powerless, I lack the power of choice and drink. Lack of power, that's my dilemma. And then I'm manageable. Again, as I said, it's by our circumstances, not our virtues, that we saw change, is what Bill Wilson said. So I look around and I see the circumstances and I think that my life is unmanageable because I lost a job, I lost a girl, I went to jail, I pissed the bed, blah, 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 blah. All this different stuff, and like, that's just not the case. All that stuff is it's a reflection of however I'm treating this internal unmanageability. And my sponsor flipped me to page 52, which is the bedevilments, where it asks, like, are you having problems with personal relationships? Can you control your emotional natures? Do you have a feeling of uselessness? You can't seem to be of real help to other people, all these things. And that's while sober. That's not while I'm out using and drinking. Obviously, that stuff's all true while I'm using and drinking, but, like, it's still true sober. And, like, let me give you an example. I wake up in the morning, and I don't feel connected. And that irritability's going, and I just don't feel okay. And I'm like, I reach over, I grab my phone, and I open up to the Amazon app. And I'm like, I'm going to buy something, because that always feels pretty cool. And so I buy a couple things, and they fill the void for a little bit. And then I buy a couple more things, and now all of a sudden, I can't pay rent, because I've spent my money to fill this internal condition, and I find myself homeless, sober. Now I'm starting to see the outside circumstances as a result of however I'm treating this internal unmanageability. So the unmanageability, again, is you're going to see all the stuff on the outside. That's the external. It's very clear. It's present. It's right in front of you. But, like, how do I feel when I put down drugs and alcohol? What's going on with me? And I'll try anything and everything to fill that void, and what eventually happens is it fails, and I'll go back to alcoholism over and over and over again, or I'll find some sort of solution. And when you get that, and, like, you fully believe that, like, you'll 100% drink again, and, like, if you're like I was on July 6, 2013, and you never ever want to go back to that life, and again, like when I sit here, or I'm sure last month as Chris sat here, like, I'm talking about permanent sobriety. I'm talking about the idea that if you're sitting in this room right now, you never ever ever have to go back to active alcoholism. You never ever ever have to go back to how you feel the day you came in here. And people are like, oh, well, you can't say that. It's one day at a time. Actually, I can. For the reason is I tell my sponsees all the time that they need to practice God reliance, because I'll fail you over and over and over again. But you know who will not fail you? God. Never once have I seen that happen. Never once have I seen somebody come in here and go through the 12 steps and get a home group, have a spiritual experience, get a commitment, get involved in the fellowship, and drink again. Never once have I seen that happen. I've seen a lot of people come in and not do those things and drink again. A lot of people. But the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that connect me to that power, and as long as I continue to do those and continue to stay connected to that power, it works every single time. It makes it very simple. Like, once I understand that, I'm left with two options. One is I'll take the lackadaisical approach, and, like, I'll go out and do some experimenting on my own. And I'll find out if that stuff's true. I'll find out if the obsession of the mind is real. I'll find out if the allergy of the body is real. I'll find out if that spiritual malady is very real. And typically what will happen is they'll come back more motivated. I know a lot of people that have been through the doctor's opinion and gained that information and looked at it over their life and gone on runs. And I can promise you that it sucks to be out there knowing, like, that's the lie I went out on. To be out doing stuff that you don't want to do to try and satisfy some sort of craving, even though it doesn't work, it sucks. Love you guys. Thank you for coming. So the other option is that it will motivate me to do steps 2 through 12. When I fully get that and I never want to go back to active alcoholism, what's going to happen is I'm going to go through the step process. And as it was taught to me early on, and I've seen it over the last 2.5 years, like, whenever you go to a meeting, there's typically 3 groups of people. There's the first group, which maybe they don't want to be there. You know, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking. It doesn't even qualify whose. So it could be, you know, the court's desire. You know, you could come in here with a back problem. You know, you just want to get your girlfriend off your back. I get that. There's a lot of people in AA with back problems. But it doesn't qualify whose desire. So you're welcome in the rooms. But there's some people that don't want to be here. Then there's the middle third. This is the people like me, and this is the people that my heart absolutely breaks for. Is it whether or not they'll stay sober depends entirely upon who they surround themselves with in the 10 minutes after the meeting, outside of the meeting, or when they get back to their halfway house. That's been me my entire life. I just wanted to fit in, and whatever the people around me were doing was what I was doing. So that's why I hope that if you're in here right now and you're in that middle third, that you get connected with some people that are doing the deal, and not some people that are, you know, getting all dressed up and slicking up their hair to go try and find a girlfriend at the, you know, 8:30 EDI meeting next door. Like, you need to get involved with some people that are doing the deal. And thank God that when I came down to South Florida, I met a guy that brought an H&I commitment into a treatment center and was sponsoring a ton of people and connected me with some brothers that were all about this and all about going through this, and he made this book come to life. And then there's the third group, which is they're done. They're done. They will come in here, and it doesn't matter what you say or what you do, they will find somebody that has a connection with God, and they will go through the step process, and they will be freed from the obsession to drink, and their life will get infinitely better because they've had, I don't know if it's more pain or desperation or what it is, but like you get to a certain point of that incomprehensible demoralization where you're just done. You're just done. And the good thing about that is it doesn't matter which group you're in, your chances of staying sober are exactly the same. It's all contingent upon what you do out here. What I can tell you is if you don't go through the step process and you can relate to what I talked about in the first step, you're probably not going to stay sober. You can go to every single meeting in South Florida for the rest of however long you want, but if you don't get involved in the actual work that will connect you to some sort of power that can free you from the obsession, your meeting attendance doesn't matter. And I came down to South Florida under the impression that Alcoholics Anonymous was about meeting attendance. And if I just went to enough meetings and maybe looked at a few areas of my life, like I'd be good. I would be good. But I soon found out that that's not the case. That's not the case because I can come sit in a meeting for an hour and maybe I can learn something, maybe I can relate to something, and like I can hear some war stories or whatever, and I can hear of other people's consequences, but like when the obsession of the mind hits, none of that matters. How often does the thought pop into my head of going to get high, and I'm like, well, I remember that 7 o'clock meeting where Camron was speaking, and he said I probably shouldn't do that. It never happens. It never happens. I need to get some sort of power. I'm powerless. The rest of the steps are about connecting to some sort of power. Some power that can free me from the obsession. The first step talks about, like, I'm beyond human aid. There's a solution, gives 6 forms of human aid that are good, but in and of themselves will not keep you sober. Will not keep you sober. If you relate to what I talked about and you can concede to yourself that that's you, like, you're beyond human aid. Then what happens is we go into the second step. And this is the only step in the book that it's not going to tell you where it happens. It's not going to say, you're now at step 2. For the reason that it's a coming to believe. It's an experience that you have to have. And I've seen, from my experience, typically step 2 happens as a result of going through with the rest of the steps. So what my sponsor did is he sat me down and we read through the book word by word. And that's one way I went through it. I've went through with sponsors that are so well versed in the book that they don't even open the book and they ask me the questions and we go through the process just to get the work, just to get the relief that comes as a result of the process. And then they would offer to take me back through the text to learn the book, et cetera, et cetera. But I was taking to page 47, where it says, there's only one second step question in the book. There were the 2 first step questions. When I drink, can I control how much that I drink every time? No. Then there's the question to qualify the obsession, which is, have you ever wanted to stop and not been able to? Yeah, a lot of times. I tried everything I could prior to coming to Alcoholics Anonymous to stop, and none of it worked. So those are the 2 first step questions. There's one second step question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, in a power greater than myself? Abby Thatcher went to see Bill Wilson when Bill was still drinking. And he gets there and Bill opens the door and the first thing he notices is there's a light on in his eyes. Something's different. This is a guy that he used to drink with. Not only a guy that he used to drink with, but a guy that was like way worse than him. And like we all have one friend that was typically way worse than we were that we would compare ourselves to. If you don't have that one friend, you are probably that person. And what happened is he opened the door, and this is a guy he used to drink with and was really, really bad, and he sees something's different. He notices the light in his eyes. And my experience is that when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous or wherever it was, and I went into a meeting and I saw people that got up and shared about the same exact thing that I went through. Not the circumstantial stuff, but the stuff that I talked about with I put down drugs and alcohol, my life gets worse. And this fact that I can't stop, or I can't stay stopped, no matter how bad I want to, no matter how many consequences I've had. People came in and they talked about that stuff, and I knew that they drank and used exactly like I did, and now they weren't. And in that moment of noticing that and seeing the light on in their eyes and seeing their levity and their freedom and the things about them, I noticed there's got to be something here that works. And in that moment, it's a second step experience of itself. And what the book says is just that little bit of willingness. If you're sitting in here and you don't believe in God, that's great. It doesn't tell you have to. It's not a requirement. What happens is, my sponsor told me, dude, it doesn't matter. I don't care what you believe, really. Are you willing? Are you willing to go through with the steps? That's all you need. He said, you can believe whatever you want. It's not about your conception of God. It's not about your understanding. And none of that stuff's important. really. He said, if you can wrap your head around an infinite God, you probably need a new God. Because what's going to happen is you're going to go through with the steps and you're going to have an experience with whatever it is that you want to call God. So if you're sitting in here and you don't believe in God, that's fine. You don't have to. Like, just be willing to go through with the step process. He told me, like, get off the debate team. Like, you don't need to understand this in order to do it. Like, how many times have you gone to a meeting and at the end they circle up and somebody goes, it works if you know it? Never once. Never once. This is a program of action. It's a program of action. If I went home tonight and I had all the ingredients for a cake and I mixed them up and I went over to the oven and I put them in the oven and I turned the oven on, I'm not going to stand outside of the oven and, like, bite my nails and be like, oh, I really hope this shit bakes. Like, it's going to bake. It's going to bake whether I believe in it or not. If you go through with the step process thoroughly and honestly, I can promise you, you're going to have an experience with whatever it is that you want to call God, whether you believe in it or not. But that's what he asked me. Are you willing? Really, just to go through the rest of the steps. He really didn't care if I was willing to believe. He just said, go through with the process. My experience is that I was willing to believe. I was a kid that was brought up in church and had experiences, and I just didn't know exactly what. I thought maybe my conception was off, or I thought at times that I had a great relationship with God, and, like, I came into AA and I was like, no, I have a good relationship with God. And they're like, dude, you were just getting drunk like 2 days ago. Like, it couldn't have been that good. There's some sort of blockage there. And he showed me that has nothing to do with whatever your conception is. So if you came in here with a conception of God, this is the part for Bill Wilson that was essentially a second step. When Ebby came to see him, they're having a conversation, and what happens is Bill slides him a drink across the table. He's thinking like, oh, I'm going to drink with my old friend. We did this plenty of times. And he's like, no, I'm good. What he says is, no, I found religion. And Bill's like, okay, this nut. He's, used to be an alcoholic. Now he's, like, crazy about religion. He's just a lunatic. But as he talks, like, they're having a conversation, and people that talk about it a lot of times make it seem like it was, like, a pleasant, like, nice, like, yeah, let me help you, pal, conversation. But Ebby was getting frustrated because he's talking about this whole God thing, and Bill's, like, one, drunk, but two, not, like, responding the way he wants him to. And what happens is Ebby eventually throws up his hands and he says, well, why don't you choose your own conception of God? Ebby came from the Oxford group, which was clearly a Christian movement. So they have their conception of God. And Bill couldn't wrap his head around that. He couldn't buy that because of experiences he's had prior, and whether it was resentment or fear or whatever it was. But when Ebby throws up his hand and says, why don't you choose your own conception? That's when Bill has his second step and believes something's worked in the life of this man because he was exactly like I was, and there's no more power in him than is in me right now as I sit here drunk. So there has to be something at work in his life, and he has that second step experience. And as I've gone through with my sobriety, like, I've seen many, many moments, which I like to call God moments, where it's just so incredibly obvious that there's some sort of power at work. And I came to believe that something could free me from the obsession to drink. Something could restore me to sanity. And as soon as I walked out of a fifth step, my perception had changed. And I could view things differently. And I could go about and when I get into a situation, I would react differently. And I remember there were times when people would come up to me and say, like, you never would have done that 6 months ago. I was in treatment with you. I know you wouldn't have done that. And I can look back and I can reflect and I can see that has nothing to do with me. If I had the power to change myself, I would have done it a long time ago. I would have done it when I had all that pain and suffering and those kind of things. But I didn't have the power. So it's the second step, willingness. I got to get into step 3. I'll probably have to talk a little bit about it next week. But we just read how it works in the beginning of this meeting. We typically read it every AA meeting. And it has the ABCs. What it says right after the ABCs is being convinced we were at step 3. Being convinced of what? Well, the ABCs, which are essentially the heart of step 1 and 2. So once you're convinced of step 1 and 2, then you move on to the third step. So like I said at the beginning of this, I don't think there's any work in the first 3 steps. It's 2 conclusions, and then it's a decision. Ask yourself, do I typically get convinced of an action, or do I get convinced of an idea? I typically get convinced of an idea, which hopefully at some point forces me into some sort of action. And so we're being convinced. How am I being convinced? Because I lived it. I lived the first step. Because I came in so incredibly broken, and I saw the light in your guys' eyes, and I came to believe that this might work. This might work. Or it's a crazy cult. It's one of the two. My hope is that it works. And then I go to the third step, which, as I said at the beginning of this, at the very, very basic level for a newcomer is just a decision to go on with the rest of the steps. I just told you guys, my conception of God doesn't matter because the issue is not my conception. My issue is that I'm blocked off from God by resentment, selfishness, fear, dishonesty, the way I've been living my life for the last however many years. And the way that that was explained to me is if I separated this room in half and we were on one side and there was a power on the other side and there were a line of boulders down the middle of the room here and we needed to connect to that power to never go back to active alcoholism, what the book says is steps 4 through 9 are a process of facing and ridding ourselves of the things which block us from power. So steps 4 through 9 are the process of removing enough of those boulders so that we can get in there and we can get connected to some sort of power. If I don't do that, if I don't go through 4 through 9, it doesn't matter how many times I wake up in the morning and I hit my knees and I ask God to remove the obsession. It doesn't matter how many meetings I go to. It doesn't matter how many evening inventories I do, because the fact is I am blocked off. I am blocked off, and those things that I am blocked off by are going to continue to manifest themselves in my life over and over and over again, unless I go through 4 and 5 and I become aware of them. And I confess them to somebody else, and then I offer them up to God in 6 and 7. But as a newcomer, it's just a decision to go on with the rest of the steps. I was under the impression, I went over to my sponsor's house to do my 3rd steps, and we hit our knees and we said a prayer. And I'm going to do one immediately following this meeting with one of my sponsees. And I thought that the prayer was the 3rd step. But it wasn't until very, very later that my sponsor sat me down and showed me the book, probably around 2 years sober, and said, what it says is, next, we launched out on a course of vigorous action. Prior to that, I don't know why I even quoted that. What it says is, next, hereafter in the drama of life, God was going to be our provider. He is the principal, and we are his agents. He is the father, we are his children. When the book says next, what it's talking about is right now. Meaning immediately. Meaning Bill Wilson essentially is a wordsmith, and he just tricked me into, after I've read that, I've kind of already made the decision. Because next, right now, we decided that hereafter in this drama of life, God will be our provider. So, it was showed to me at the basic level. Also, what the book does is it'll have a step, and then immediately after it'll have a promise. So after that paragraph is the 3rd step promises, which say, we have a new employer. Being all-powerful, he provides what we need if we stick close to him and perform his work well. That's a promise, but it's also a warning. So, the 3rd step, essentially, Bill spends a lot of time, I'm definitely going to have to talk a little bit about it next week, but Bill spends a lot of time explaining, and if you read this book, and however sober Bill was at the time when he wrote this, which I don't think was very, very long, it's crazy. I can't imagine anybody that I know, really anybody I know, period, no matter how much time, writing something like this. And as I look back over the slender threads in the history of how this happened and the things that happened, it's very clear to me that God's hand was all over the making of this book. And he spends a lot of time talking about, in a way that makes sense to a guy like me, how I've run the show my entire life, in every area of my life. And I've spent all of this time trying to make the people around me or the situations around me come off the way that I need them to go, so that I can be happy. If only this would happen, or this would happen, or this would happen, or this person would do this, or this would happen, I would be okay. Why don't these people get that? If they would just do that, their lives would be better too. And I truly think that and believe that in that selfishness and self-centeredness that's actually true. And it's not until later that I find out that that's actually not the case. But essentially the 3rd step is I'm no longer running the show. There's someone, thankfully, way better at it than me that's been willing to do it, and I just need to surrender that idea and give it up to him. And as I go through, I did my 3rd step with my sponsor, and I saw that, and he showed me, I have a new employer, which means what? I have a new job. As a newcomer, my job is to stay sober. But what it says on page 102 is my job now is to be at the place where I can be of maximum service to God and to his fellows. And then he took me back and he showed me where it says, he is the agent, or we are the agents. He is the principal, we are the agents. An agent is defined as someone that's paid a wage to speak or act on behalf of. So I'm getting paid a wage, spiritually speaking, to speak or work on behalf of God. And my 3rd step looks like I did it with my sponsor. I hit my knees, and I got up, and he said, I need a commitment from you. And I said, okay, what is that? He said, I need you to promise to go on with the rest of the steps. And I said, yeah, absolutely. And he was like, you know why I do that? And I was like, I have no idea. He's like, because we lose a lot of people on the 4th step. You're going to leave here with the instructions to do a 4th step, and if you don't do it, what's going to happen is you're going to drink again. And then what you're going to do is you're going to go out and you're going to spread the disease instead of the solution. And what the disease is that I tried Alcoholics Anonymous and it didn't work. But the fact is I just didn't do the work. That's the truth of it. So he had me commit to do that. And I thought I was done. I was like, I did a 3rd step. I'm good. I never have to worry about that ever again. And it wasn't until later that I realized that I have to, almost on a moment-to-moment basis, make sure that my third step is very current. And that as I look through the areas of my life and I inventory the areas of my life, I'm not trying to run the show in any of those. That I'm making sure that my will is aligned with God's will. And essentially what I'm doing is the only thing that I'm required to do, which is suit up and show up, and He will provide for me. That's why it says, being all-powerful, He provided what we needed if we stuck close to Him and performed His work well. When I stop doing those things, it's kind of similar to like if I leave my parents' house, like they're no longer required or obligated to provide for me. But, if I leave God's house and I start to run the show again, I know where that gets me, and I've seen it happen over and over again. And we'll get a little more into that next week just because we got to build it up for the fourth step. But with that being said, I love you guys. Thank you for having me.